trolling Senator Elizabeth Warren as a snake, and in post after post, labeling Mayor Pete Buttigieg a rat. Two victims of this tell CNN they were so afraid of the online attacks they faced, they don't even want us to describe the circumstances for fear it would start up again. They both just questioned the politics of Bernie Sanders in a public setting, and their personal lives were exposed and attacked.
Well, just what Nick said, I think that's right. I mean, there is no Democratic establishment anymore. There's not even a Democratic Party anymore. The Democratic Party is a meaningless notion that the party, like the Republican Party, has been hollowed out and privatized to a large extent. There are Democratic elites, and so when we're talking about the Democratic establishment, we're really talking about a number of, a bunch of people that Nick also knows well, which really means Democratic donors.
This is the most important election in the history of our country.
This election is the most important in the modern history of this country.
The election in 2020, without hyperbole, is going to be the most important election this country has undergone in over 100 years. Not a joke.
This November's elections are more important than any I can remember in my lifetime, and that includes when I was on the ballot.
There are just 8 days left in what is the most important election of our lifetime.
Where did you guys come to a conclusion about why Clinton had such a hard time just owning that she did something wrong with the email server?
You know, I know that Russia and other forces would love us to have a debate. This is exactly what they want. They want us to have a debate about the internal structure of Hillary's campaign, what's true, what's not true. And I'm just not going to play that. I'm sorry.
We came, we saw, we died.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It's like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
You know, people have said, if you look at, for example, the heat that ended up around the bend the knee of Colin Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. Many smart people have said it actually was not a thing. The Russian bots are taken out. Yes.
But I saw my mom. My mom is the strongest woman I know.
She should be running.
It's not about.
If you're like me, one of the millions suffering from pain caused by migraine, Nurtec ODT may help. It's the only medication that can treat a migraine when it strikes and prevent migraine attacks.
Trump and the Republicans lose on Tuesday, and if they lose badly, it's not going to be because of the left, whatever that means. It's not because the 50 Antifa black mask guys who roam around the United States breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Rudy Giuliani, there's only three things he mentioned in a sentence, a noun and a verb and 9/11. I mean...
I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today.
And I went to Wall Street in December of 2007, before the big crash that we had, and I basically said, cut it out.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden.
This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
He is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
I can't do it.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. And thing sucks.
In 5, 4, 3.
Citizens of the internet. I don't know what I just did right there. Kind of took myself off the stage there for a second. Hope y'all are doing well out there. This is episode 76 of the Politics Show. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. You are greatly appreciated. My follower subscriber count continues to increase slowly but surely. So if you haven't liked and subscribed, you know the deal. Do that. Got my 3 Wolf Moon shirt today for you. And we got some good stuff to talk about, actually. You know me. I'm always watching all the political news and kind of trying to collect some and curate interesting stuff to talk about. And there's a lot going on. And, you know, the corporate press tends to look kind of like this most of the time. So, you know, we try to be the opposite of that guy, the boot sucker. Guy's more than a bootlicker. He's a boot sucker. So let's get it rolling today. This first piece of tape we're going to talk about is a great one. And the theme today is Vindication of the Vilified. And just to kind of explain the point behind that, you know, people who tend to say things that are outside the norm are vilified. You look throughout history at people like Galileo, who was vilified for saying that the earth actually revolves around the sun and not vice versa. Guy was put in, I think they just recently basically requited that guy of his heresy charge in the Catholic Church. And so now what we're seeing is there was a little incident a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it or not. It was called a pandemic. And this is pretty much the tone of it.
But ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America?
In the aftermath of this, there seems to be a willful kind of well, whatever, it happened. We don't need to look into it. No need to think about it. Let's just keep trudging along. And as we're going to see in this conversation with Mr. Matt Taibbi, that's not gonna work. We need to really go a lot deeper on where we're at with this. So this is an interview with a guy named RJ Escow that Matt Taibbi did. And I'm just going to start it off with kind of the tone that they set using this Voltaire quote. And this is we're going to go through a lot of this because this is very good stuff. Let me make sure the volume's up here. All right. Let's dive into it.
Yeah. You know, one of the things you've obviously been covering is, I forget what you and Michael Schellenberger and a couple other folks call it, but the censorship industrial conflict, complex, right? Isn't that it? And it's very interesting to me because I always go back to not to get all high flown about it, but I do always go back to Voltaire. And I think it was Voltaire who said, I despise what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This used to be, as you've talked about a lot in your writing and elsewhere, a mainstream opinion, especially among American liberals.
It did used to be a mainstream opinion. And an interesting side note here, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Thomas Massey got in trouble for posting the quote, "To learn who controls you, learn who you can't criticize." And people came out after that and said that was a Nazi racist quote, which I had always heard it was attributed to Voltaire. But, you know, once you start getting close to the, once you get over the target, you're a racist. You know how that goes. So the next little bit they talk about here is how, and this is so good, tribalism has kind of ruined the discourse in the country. So let's jump up to this right here. This is quite good.
For example, to defend the right of somebody to, I guess two things, and then I'll throw it back to you. But one, to defend the right of people to express ideas they find politically disagreeable or even abhorrent, which used to be the whole point. Among Democrats, I'm sure among Republicans too, but Democrats is where the shift is. So there's that, and the sort of de-Voltairizing of a Democratic Party culture. And then the other piece of it is that, as Thomas Frank and others have written, the Democratic Party has become a party of professional, elite, educated people. And so I think COVID was a turning point because there were ideas that challenged the scientific consensus. And while I understand the desire to protect lives, and that maybe the scientific consensus is a way to do that, when you cross the line into censoring scientists, you talk about Dr. J. Bhattacharya, who is a Stanford, I believe, medical scientist or something, who was censored. The culture of professional insiderism, as well as the culture of Team Blue, seems to me to be a factor. But I don't know. That's my take on it. What do you think?
So I think I would have agreed wholeheartedly with that. And part of it I still do. I think one of the things I testified about last week, in a kind of a vain effort to try to reach out to Democrats, was to point out the class nature of this whole thing, that this is basically exclusively affluent professional class America, insisting upon a closed door credential system whereby, you know, sort of groups of institutions, the military, intelligence related groups, the Global Engagement Center under state, they work with academic institutions, the media.
So this is interesting because basically what he's explaining here is what we talk about on this show all the time, how the legacy media used to be gatekeepers. They used to be able to gatekeep elections, and Trump kind of overturned that in 2016. And that right there is why all of this started. And these guys, of course, go into a little bit more detail on this. But let Matt continue while I finish creating this cigarette that I'm working on right here.
But it's all sort of upper class Ivy League types. You cannot be involved in the censorship effort or anti-disinformation and be like a working class ordinary person. Like that's just not possible. So ultimately,
that is so key right there, because this is the gatekeep that I was just talking about. In the past, the CNNs and the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses of the world have been the kingmakers during election season because they control the discourse. And if everyone's talking about how Bernie Sanders is a secret Russian or Trump is secretly working with Putin, that is a good way to control the election. And you can see them attempting to do it now. I hope it doesn't work, but you know, like I have relatives who are super concerned about abortion suddenly. You know, they only get concerned about abortion every 4 years when the Democrats are trying to scare them about it. But this new landscape, this new internet landscape is a threat to these people who have always been able to gatekeep elections. Let me let Matt continue here.
You're talking about a tiny group of people who are designing the algorithms that are going to decide who gets to be heard and who doesn't get to be heard. Now, I think that's part of the picture, but in the last year or so of having to research the story a lot, we continually find that the roots of this go back to the war on terror. A lot of these groups that are doing anti-disinformation work have their genesis in the post 9/11 growth of the security state. A lot of the institutions that do this work exclusively began as counter-disinformation groups that targeted Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
And that right there is why Dick Cheney and John Bolton are behind Kamala Harris, the neocons.
And they eventually sort of made this switch that one former Joint Terrorism Task Force official described to me as CT to CP, which is counterterrorism to counterpopulism. And you see this, we built this kind of gigantic extra legal machinery to go after propaganda by ISIS and al-Nusra and all these other groups. And then after a series of incidents, beginning with Tea Party, Occupy, the Arab Spring, then it's Brexit, Trump, Jeremy Corbyn, the Sanders movement, all those things convince people in the national security and foreign policy establishment that we have to start using these tools domestically. And
this was liberal America's response to that.
America, you and me, ain't that America?
So let's jump up to another piece of this conversation. The thing that's funny to me about all this too is when you really break this down, they're fighting for control over something that isn't real, right? Like the internet isn't real. Unplug it and go outside. But it clearly shapes the way people think about everything. It's the new media, and it's so obvious to people like me what's going on. These people, the Andrea Mitchells and the David Muirs and the Brian Williams of the world used to be the kingmakers. They're basically fucking actors that read a script on TV. And now you have real reporters like Matt Taibbi with the access to the internet, and Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fong and Max Blumenthal. And these guys are actually doing real news. And they're, 6 months ahead of, the David Muirs and the actors who read scripts on TV. So they kind of go into what he just said, the whole thing about populism. I'm just going to keep playing this because this whole thing, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but the whole thing is really good.
That is when you see the switch. And what is so scary about this is they don't particularly distinguish between, let's say, an outraged political electoral movement in the United States or in Britain and a terrorist group overseas. Like the machinery is the same in both cases. The Democratic Party has just become kind of like the establishment party at this point. You might have still had some bipartisan elements of it if Donald Trump had not swept in 2016.
Oh, we do have some bipartisan elements, Matt. I don't know if you saw Dick Cheney and John Bolton and a bunch of other hacks have lined up behind Kamala Harris. So that point that he's making there, the Democratic Party is the establishment now. Yeah, they're the status quo. Arguing with someone about the election, or someone who's close to me that wants me to vote for Kamala Harris, which will never happen. And I kind of broke it down to her the other night. I'm just like, look, at the very basic core, this election is a choice between continuing the status quo, which is going on now, or changing it. And Trump is the change, and Kamala Harris is the continuation. No matter how many times they go out and say, turn the page or whatever bullshit hypnosis line they're using this week, it's pretty obvious what the choice is between the status quo or something different. And I'm not arguing that Trump is going to radically change anything. That is yet to be seen. He definitely talks a good game, but he was president once for 4 years. So we'll see. But, you know, every election is a choice between the lesser of two evils. And right now, Trump is definitely the lesser of two evils.
And obliterated what was left of the Bush neoconservatives. Now, basically, you see this sort of polarity where it's one group of politicians, sort of neoliberal.
I disagree that he obliterated what was left of the Bush neoconservatives because they're all lining up behind Kamala, Matt. I'm sure you've seen that.
Neoconservative politicians manning all of these groups and seeing all these belligerents around them as linked in a way. Everything from Viktor Orban to Modi to Trump to anti-vaxxers, they're all threats. They're all categorized in the same way. And
they're all threats to the status quo.
But ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America?
And I think that's kind of important to understand. Like, yes, the cultural thing has happened. There have been lots of changes about how we think about speech. But more importantly, it's coincided with this collapse in trust in institutions in America, in the functioning of the sort of establishment two-party system. We've seen all these uprisings, electoral and otherwise, all over the world. And this is part of the machinery that they've wheeled out in response. And I think they're not wrong on some level, right? Like, you know, a lot of these uprisings and political movements would not have been possible without Twitter and other platforms like it, because free media works.
Well, it's so interesting.
So this guy makes the best point right now. And I'm not even going to step on it. Just listen to what he says.
Matt, because there are two dimensions to that. Yes, they work, but they wouldn't be working this way if you had, and this is where my political ideology comes in, but I think it's right because it's mine. You wouldn't have the Tinder for this, you know, social media wildfire if you had a system that was working for the majority of people. There were some political scientists who did a study, I think it was, it was after Trump. I think it was 2018, 2019.
You wouldn't have this problem if the system was working. And that's what Taibbi called, you know, what the security state or the censorship industrial complex sees all these groups as belligerents. Absolutely. The Bernie Sanders campaign was a group of belligerents who, like, we want healthcare. Give us healthcare. Nothing has changed, of course. They just, you know, censored and stopped everybody and let Trump win. They, like, basically the genesis of this project led to Trump's election because they tried to censor all the dissidents during the Bernie campaign, and then Trump just ended up beating Hillary Clinton. So in 2020, they went to extreme measures.
Where they surveyed people in Western Europe.
In 2020, they went to extreme measures.
You and me, ain't that America?
European countries and North American countries. So, quote unquote, developed world, as it used to be called. And they found that, among other things, that more than a third of the people they surveyed were more than willing, I'm going to seriously paraphrase from the political science language, but this was the gist of it. For example, were more than willing to knowingly pass on misinformation if it was emotionally satisfying or pissed off the people they thought were running the world, for one thing. But they used a striking phrase. They said that this subset of the population, mostly working class, mostly middle, lower income rather, lower at 50%, below the 50% mark. The phrase they used, they were Dutch or something. was the sentiment they expressed was they wanted to burn down the political cosmos, the democratic cosmos. They want to burn it down. And that
disrupt the status quo. That's the thing that, you know, the brunch liberals who think Kamala Harris is a good idea don't understand about the political landscape of the last 20 years. And honestly, this next election to me is going to be a proving ground on the Nielsen ratings that I just showed a couple weeks ago, because the Nielsen ratings show that streaming is overtaking broadcast and cable. And once you get to streaming, you've got multiple voices in the mix. And yeah, I mean, my relatives who are brunch liberals watch the fucking, you know, YouTube feed for ABC News or whatever bullshit corporate crap they pipe into YouTube. But you just, it's when you look at the podcast circuit that Trump's doing, I think this election is going to be telling, because if Trump wins by a landslide, it means the media landscape has changed completely and the corporate media is pretty much dead. Which I think that they're going to fight tooth and nail to prevent, and you can see it happening. But that's what I'm interested to see the results of this election. I don't think that Trump winning will change anything major any more than I think Kamala Harris winning will change anything major. But I'm interested to see the results of this election for that reason. So these guys here, they get into this thing right here, you know? They get into this thing about how populism is demonized. And he says something I never thought about, which is populism is popular. Populism is popular. Like, it's related to things that are popular among people.
To me, what was missing from their analysis is, to me, that's a rational response to a system that's screwed you for decades, right? So from a political point of view, there are two ways to respond to that. You can meet their needs and hear them out, or you can try to suppress those voices. And
yes, this right here, this is the genesis, like what he just said right there. You can meet people's needs or you can try to suppress them. That is the genesis of this show, really. This is the genesis of me being involved with the Bernie campaign. It's the genesis of all that, because the first election cycle I volunteered for Bernie was the 2015-2016 cycle. And I was banned from Twitter multiple times for ridiculous things. And it became clear to me now that then, because what was happening then, the dynamic that was happening then, let's go back. Let's go back. Let me use my sound effect. I got a good opportunity to use. Let's go back to the Bernie days. So back then, Bernie was winning primaries, and the corporate media, people like Chris Matthews and what's that other broad's name that was upset about Nevada? I don't remember her name now, but anyway, they were so upset. And it was visible how upset they were that their grip was slipping away, because all year they were like, Biden and Kamala, Biden and Kamala, Biden and Kamala. That's who you're going to vote for. And then everyone voted for Bernie Sanders. And Chris Matthews at that point likened the Bernie campaign to like the Nazis. They ran the typical corporate CUNT playbook when that happened. And what this guy just said just basically sums all that up. You have two choices when you have these kind of voices of dissent. You can either listen to them or suppress them. And guess which route the Democrats went? And guess which route their dumbass partisan hack followers? You're going to see that a lot. Sorry. Actually, not sorry. It's fucking hilarious.
it seems to me, or you can exploit their frustration. My take, Trump exploited the frustration, and the Democrats are trying to suppress the voices, or maybe throw a little bit of what people need. But, you know, telling people that the economy is good when they don't think it's good is...
Exactly.
You know, and so what And what goes along with it is all of a sudden populism became a dirty word after 2016. You know, the populist movements of the 19th century were progressive, they were enlightened, they paved the way for all sorts of things.
So again, this is what frustrates me so much about the Democratic Party. They pretend to be the progressives while they continually stomp real progressives. Like the Republicans sit and call them progressive. The Democratic Party is not progressive. And again, this guy just really making a great case here.
We take for granted now, retirement income, minimum wage, or those types of things. But populism became a dirty word, which means democracy is a dirty word because populism is what's popular, right? So
democracy just got twisted into meaning the rule of law, or like basically the rule of the elites that have the fucking reins right now. I think in the debate I showed between Pelosi and the Mumford and Sons guy, Pelosi literally says in that, and I'll have to go back and watch this clip or pull it up, but she says democracy is the rule of law. No, democracy is the rule of the majority. It's not the rule of law. Some cunt can make a law. So let's finish this out because I'm gonna transition into another segment within this piece here.
To me, and I think this was a primrose path people were led down, but I think that's where they're left. And I think that, you know, last comment is, you know, I think outlets like MSNBC and CNN have contributed to this by, for example, I had an argument on this very subject with a very bright and good guy, constitutional law professor, and I asked him what he thought of the weaponization committee hearing and the way you and Schellenberger have been, I think it was Schellenberger was with you, have been treated by the Democrats on that committee. He knew nothing about it. This is someone who specializes in free speech issues. So that plus the, you know, echo chamber effect, I think we're in trouble.
So I want to pause there for a second because I've made this point before, and I if there are any brunch libs watching out there, I don't hate you. I think that brunch liberals are well-meaning. I mean, I have several in my family. I don't think that they're bad people. I think they're misinformed people because that's what the corporate news does these days. They do this.
But ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America?
So let me just finish this out. Taibbi basically sums up the anger that people have and why I like Trump, honestly, because he pisses off people at MSNBC and CNN.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think your analysis is correct. You know, what they're doing, and it's just a mechanization. It's designing an algorithm to multiply at scale the mistake that was made in 2016. So when you went out on the campaign trail and you talked to people at Trump crowds and asked them why are you voting for Donald Trump, you would get all kinds of answers, but the number one answer was like, I know he's full of it. I'm voting for him because I want to piss off, you know, all these clowns I see on television who I know are freaked out by him. And you know, that sentiment has continued. You referenced telling people that their feelings about the economy are wrong. You know, Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning columnist, you know, he recently did a column where he's commenting on a survey that the Guardian US did about feelings about the economy. How do you feel about the economy? And huge numbers of Americans said they didn't feel so hot about it. And he describes this as a falsehood, as, you know, as a kind of misinformation, that your own perceptions of your own anxiety are incorrect. That is not reality. And that's what they're trying to do with this anti-disinformation program. They begin with things that sound like they make sense. Oh, we have to stop people from saying that if you get the vaccine, you're going to get a microchip implanted or whatever it is, right? And that's very rational. Then you get under the hood of what these programs really are, and you find that they're defining misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, which is a very Orwellian concept, which means true but sort of inconvenient. They define it as anything that kind of undermines confidence in government policies. So the classic example with COVID was any news that promoted hesitancy. So that could be something as simple as a person who's very pro-vaccine doing a Facebook post saying, "Yeah, an uncle of mine got the shot and died of myocarditis."
That's misinformation, FYI.
But ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America?
I love that picture so much. So we are going to transition now into the second part of this, where Taibbi actually breaks some news. So breaking news right here on the Politics Show this morning. Sunday, October 20th, episode 76. We're going to break some news for you right here. Matt Taibbi discovered that the government is manufacturing news. They're literally creating fake news. And he's still doing these Twitter file dumps. Him and Schellenberger just testified in front of a Senate hearing last week, which I haven't even watched yet. I think Jimmy covered some of it. I'm sure Due Dissidents covered it. But I haven't gotten caught up in all my favorite shows, so I'm a little in the dark right now. But listen to what Taibbi says right here, because he basically goes into how the political machine, the government now just manufactures fake news. They just make up stories, which is pretty obvious when you see the fake guys in masks marching with Nazi flags all the time. Those are feds. But listen to what Taibbi says here, because this is pretty crazy. Let me jump it up just a little bit. Right here.
Technology and reach, and I'm continually shocked at the extent of these programs. Even now, even last week, we got a new cache of whistleblower documents that showed us that it's not just censorship, that they're what they call offensive information operations. A lot of them are going on in the United States, and that includes things like introducing fake narratives into the news landscape, to confuse and distract from what they call misinformation.
So can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones was the one that we found in the Twitter files, which was Hamilton 68, and this was a dashboard that was designed by a very sort of curious group of individuals. One is a guy named Jonathan Morgan, another is a former FBI agent named Clint Watts. There's some DHS involvement with this. There's some Global Engagement Center involvement. They built this website that purported to track the activity of Russian trolls online. And there were myriad stories about how every time X, Y, or Z happened, Russians were reacting a certain way. So when Devin Nunes released his memo about FISA abuse, they claimed that Russian bots were leaping into action. When the Parkland shooting happened, the New York Times did a story, after school shooting, Russian bots pounce, right? And you see this whole thing about how Russians are sowing division. In the Twitter files, we find that actually the dashboard was comprised almost entirely of like American and Canadian ordinary people. They weren't tracking Russians at all. They were just tracking American citizens. And in these CTI files, what we're finding is that this was a group that was ostensibly designed to counter strictly COVID misinformation, but they were instructing their volunteers, among other things, to create sock puppet accounts, use burner phones, and to look at Hamilton 68 for ideas about themes that they might for misinformation incidents they might want to create.
So that's huge what he just said there. They discovered that these groups were manufacturing Russian, troll bot farms or whatever. And so, first of all,
Ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America?
but second of all, I have a archive because I was a Bernie Sanders volunteer, and lo and behold, I discovered a cache of old of a Facebook post I found, and so I'm going to show you. I'm going to start with this. I kind of put this graphic together at the time. It's probably not here. Let me. So this is the initial post from Facebook, and it looks like it's from. It doesn't have the date on it. Let me look at the date on the screenshot itself. So the date on this screenshot itself is 2016, May 17th at around 3:30 p.m. So this is when I took these screenshots. So this is, like I said, this is the Facebook article. So here's the comment in question here. You can see it. So this is Javier Rodriguez. Notice he's got the Hillary thing. Bernie supporters, stop acting like fools and start supporting a realistic candidate in Hillary. It's time for you to fall in line so Hillary can win this election. Hill yes, Bernie out. That's a real post from a real person on a real Facebook account. So I went into the weeds and looked at this guy's account, and of course he has no friends. It's a brand new burner account, and when I looked at it, the account had been started 5 hours ago. So just to show you what these guys are talking about was a real thing. And again, this was my genesis into this world. This is why, or my introduction into this world. This is the reason that I do this stuff, because it drives me insane that people believe this manufactured nonsense. So there's a little bit more of this. That we'll watch just a little bit more of this and then move on to something else here. But
so
very good.
Hamilton 68 doesn't have anything to do. Russians don't have anything to do with COVID misinformation, but they were creating incidents and making recommendations to platforms based on this totally ridiculous fake tool. If you go back and look at the news stories that came out of just that one thing, it's an extraordinary quantity of fake stuff, and that's just one out of a number of incidents that we're looking at that are very dubious. And
now you see the same thing happening with the ADL. Like that, these are ADL tactics. They manufacture these incidents on school campuses of anti-Semitism so that they have an excuse to take these people down. And I guarantee you, all of these organizations work together. I'm sure Taibbi has some reporting on that I just didn't, catch in them.
Done in response to
build up to this.
Over a decade of analysis of misinformation, disinformation techniques conducted by Iran, China, Russia, and we have now developed our own framework for countering those techniques but we're doing, we hear in these whistleblower files, people in these programs saying we're doing the same things the bad guys are doing, but we're doing it for good reasons. So it's not just censorship. I mean, I think we're going to find out that things like the Russia story, we're probably just scratching the surface a little bit.
A couple thoughts about that. One is when Black Lives Matter took off.
Listen to
in the
this.
summer of 2020, I remember that Susan Rice said, I think the Russians are behind it. And I think she just misread the tea leaves. I think the Democratic Party decided to get behind it. I mean, I supported Black.
And there's a clip in my intro of Kamala Harris blaming the bend the knee thing from Colin Kaepernick on Russia too. So this has been their playbook for a long time.
That's not the point. And she quickly backtracked. But I mean, that became the reflex. Another just quick story. I was invited to a dinner with a very, very famous left-wing celebrity, and I was seated next to them at this little table. And this was during the 2016 campaign, and I was introduced as Bernie's head speechwriter. And she said, I guess this was after. Yeah, this was 2017. Oh, Richard was Bernie's head speechwriter. And this person said, I think Bernie was being supported by Russia.
So I just want to show you what's going on now in America in relation to this garbage. Here's Simon Atiba from a recent post from him. And he says, Wild, your reaction. Bob Woodward sensationally claims Donald Trump's former director of national intelligence, Dan Coates, suspects Russian President Vladimir Putin is blackmailing Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. So they're trying it again. Let's listen to this real quick.
And I discussed this with Coates several months ago. He said, is this blackmail? In other words, is Trump being blackmailed?
I mean, that is wild. I don't think that has really sunk in for the public yet. That his own director.
Yeah, because it's not true. It's a bunch of dumb cunts trying to control the narrative saying this. We know it's not true.
National intelligence suspects he might be getting blackmailed. It's not a Democrat. This is not some crazy liberal commentator. It's his own.
Yeah, it's one of the uniparty cunts who doesn't want Trump, like John Bolton or Dick Cheney, who doesn't want Trump in.
Director of National Intelligence.
And the important elements in all of this is to understand how good our intelligence is.
People who believe this were asked to comment, and here was their response.
But ain't that America? You and me, ain't that America?
So I'm going to show you one more real quick thing here. And this is from the UK, another recent weaponization of this harebrained BS, as I like to call it. So this is Alex Rubinstein, a report from Alex Rubinstein from the Gray Zone. He says, this is active. He's retweeting active measures. A British woman arrested for tweet ID'd by state-backed AI surveillance firm. A UK-backed artificial intelligence firm called Logically identified 55-year-old mother of three, Bonnie Spofforth, as the first to post false information. She sits in jail over the allegation. So this is where we're heading.
Intelligence firm called Logically, putting a very clear target on our back. The company boasts how it provides clients with, quote, actionable intelligence. So let's take a quick look at the shady firm. Logically was paid more than $1.5 million by the UK government's counter disinformation unit to monitor and analyze anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine posts on social media. And its main customers just so happen to be, quote, the British, American, and Indian governments. That's according to Logically CEO Lyric Jane. The company essentially operates as a giant social media vacuum, sucking up, quote, all public posts on major social media platforms and information from over 300,000 media sources. That's according to the company's own literature. They then apply artificial intelligence to identify posts that are, quote, potentially problematic. Logically is also a member of the censorship cartel called the International Fact-Checking Network, or IFCN, a Western government and billionaire foundation-backed network whose members are given exclusive status with IFCN funders like Facebook.
So it goes back to, again, the elites, people, the educated institutional people controlling the media so that they can get back to doing what they were doing before the internet and gatekeeping elections and making sure that, Trump is a Russian, so you can't vote for him. Bernie Sanders is going to take all your money and give it to poor people or whatever you need. He's an anti-vaxxer, and America is basically like,
America, you and me, ain't that America?
So I want to show you what they're saying now about the Matt Taibbi's and Glenn Greenwald. They're actually going to run this playbook again. They're going to rock to this playlist again. The Trump-Russia collusion. So this is from David Korn. And this is from June 4th, but still, Trump-Russia denialists are back. For years, I've been here. Let me switch this for you here. For years, I've been wondering why a handful of former lefty journalists, among them Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, keep insisting that all talk of Russia's attacks on the last 2 U.S. presidential elections is a hoax. Matt Taibbi just detailed for you why it is. Concocted by hysterical liberals in league with the deep state. We've seen evidence of Vladimir Putin's clandestine hack and leak operation that boosted Donald Trump, and numerous investigations, government agencies, indictments, and bipartisan congressional reports have provided details about the Kremlin's efforts to help Trump and damage the prospects of Hillary Clinton and then Joe Biden and now Kamala Harris. Yet these dead-enders stick to the line that none of that happened and poo-poo any mention of current Russian disinformation efforts in targeting politics. These are the words of a complete moron, and I am just gonna let's get into. Let me just play this clip for you. This is a song I put together called "Trump Colluded with Russia" by David Korn, who wrote the book on Trump-Russia collusion, which is why he cannot let go of this.
With Russia, I wrote a book about it. Trump colluded with Russia, I wrote a book about it. Matt Taibbi is a bad person. Trump colluded with Russia. Trump colluded with Russia. Matt Taibbi is a bad person. I wrote a book about it. Matt Taibbi is bad. Jeff Girth. Trump colluded with Russia, I wrote a book about it. Trump colluded with Russia, I wrote a book about it. Matt Taibbi is a bad person. Trump colluded with Russia. Trump colluded with Russia. Matt Taibbi is a bad person.
So David Korn, I made that parody video last year, and David Korn is literally living it right now. In June of this year, June of 2024, a few months ago, David Korn is still living the parody video I made about him, over a year ago. And Jeff Girth, who is mentioned in the parody video, wrote a literal blow-by-blow breakdown of why this is fake, why the Trump collusion scandal is fake, in the Columbia Journalism Review, one of the most respected, journalism press outlets in the country. And America responded.
Ain't that America? You and me, ain't that America?
So we're going to move on now to our next story. That's going to be about J.D. Vance. You know him, you love him, the vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance. And he recently, I think, won a lot of people over when he went at Martha Raddatz on this Venezuelan gangs are taking over Colorado. We all know that to be true, right? I mean, now, this is a nuanced subject because my theory I'm going to get to in a minute on why this is a thing. Why, like, oh, Venezuelan gangs are taking over. Venezuelan gangs are taking over. But let's start with a clip from a show that I haven't viewed in quite a long time, The Young Turks. And I just think I wanted to see what the indie left is saying about this issue. And I'll admit it, I was somewhat surprised by Cenk and Anna's breakdown here. But I think the other reason I kind of grabbed this clip is because they have the full Martha Raddatz incident, which I'm sure you've seen by now, but you're going to get to see it again right here. So let's jump into it. Feet first. Whoa.
Full of apartment conflict.
Feet first.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns.
Do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? You seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs.
Let's just end that with not invade or take over the city, as Donald Trump said. I want to move on to
just a few apartment complexes, no big deal.
ABC's Martha Raddatz attempted to fact-check Donald Trump during her weekend interview with Trump's VP pick, JD Vance. In reality, she ended up downplaying Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. Watch.
The Republican mayor of the city said flatly the city and state have not been taken over or invaded or occupied by migrant gangs. So do you support Donald Trump making those claims that the Republican mayor says were grossly exaggerated and have hurt the city's identity and sense of safety?
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
There's got to be some. That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually exaggerated.
Wait a minute,
hold on a second.
There's got to be some.
I just want to go back to this for a second. You notice at the bottom here, at the bottom of this clip, I don't know if you can see it, but it says Team Joy. Here, let me just play it again so you can actually see it.
That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in
safety.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
There's got to be some. That means there's got to be some element of.
So I just want to highlight that Team Joy hashtag so I can play my Kamala Harris ad for you.
Oh, joy of joy. Oh, joy.
To Anna and Cenk's breakdown of this. You've seen the clip, I'm sure. I know you've seen it.
Border.
So Trump did say that the gangs had taken over the city, which absolutely is a gross exaggeration. But that is not what was debated initially. Initially, the original debate was about whether or not Venezuelan gangs had taken over apartment complexes, and everyone was gaslit to no end that no, that's not true. That was completely made up. Fast forward to this past weekend, and you have Martha Raddatz say, no, it wasn't a big deal. It was limited to a handful of apartment complexes. Okay.
So, yeah, Anna, that's the frustration. Both sides.
I'm gonna lose my
Both
mind.
sides.
Okay, by the way, this is the reason why I never apologized for our reporting on this story, because I knew I wasn't wrong. And I knew that eventually the truth would come out, and here we are. The truth came out. Okay, and I kept following the story, by the way. I followed the story when everyone else stopped paying attention to it, and the Aurora Police Department.
So the Young Turks at least slightly better than the corporate media here. But listen, it gets worse.
Put out a press release about the Venezuelan gang members that they had identified and arrested, and I'll give you the details in just a moment. But do we care about people or not? Because a handful of apartment buildings being taken over by gang members is a big problem. And I love how easily they just dismiss it like it's no big deal. Do we care about people or not? Do we care about people living in poverty?
I like that she said gang members and not Venezuelan gang members, because one of the things that's lost on people is, okay, maybe there was an incident where some Venezuelan gang members took over an apartment complex because someone stole their drugs in there or something. You know, it's possible, and it's probably, provably true. However, how many apartment complexes are taken over by American gangs constantly? No one wants to talk about that, and I'm going to get to why that's the case in just a minute. But let me let Anna
Poverty or not
disappoint you.
Okay, so let me do the Trump side and then the mainstream media side.
Yeah.
So
because they're
first of
fair and
all,
balanced here.
I mean, we're calling it an exaggeration, but is it really an exaggeration?
Yes, it's an exaggeration. Everything Trump says is an exaggeration. We had the greatest economy in the history of our country. The greatest economy. People know, Cenk, how Trump is. You know, he's been on the scene for quite a while. I don't know if you know this.
So if they took over 2 or 3 apartment buildings or apartment units, right? Thank you, Anna. That's one thing. But if you say instead of 2 or 3, they took over 8 or 9, that's an exaggeration, and that's a big exaggeration. Taking over 2 in a little area, okay, that's something. Taking over 9 feels like the whole city, etc. Right? But he didn't say that. He said they took over the entire city. The city is now run by a Venezuelan.
Okay, he did say that, but that's the kind of over dramatization that your grandmother and Democrats use on a regular basis. So that doesn't really track with me.
Which is ridiculous.
So that's not an exaggeration. That's a ridiculous lie. And it's said by a stupid person but you know what? Maybe I'm wrong.
That's projection. So again, a ridiculous lie would be like telling you that Joe Biden is, cognizant enough to run the country. So I don't think people like Cenk understand yet. For whatever reason, he's got a thick skull. Maybe it's all that corporate money he gets. But people can see through this bullshit. So when you when you morally preen and act like, oh, Trump lies, like you're all fucking liars. So Trump's exaggeration over this for over dramatization is just like the Democrats' over dramatization about Russian bots stealing the election. In fact, I would argue theirs is much worse of an exaggeration or a flat out lie.
Because no one's going to believe you that they took over Aurora, Colorado, when the Republican mayor of Aurora, Colorado comes out and says we are entirely untaken over, right? But that's not true. 40% of the country will believe you immediately. If you ask now about 100
either. There are some dumb people who will buy that, but for the most part, people know that Trump is being bombastic and dramatic about this stuff. And honestly, JD Vance, I think, has been doing a fantastic job. I have to give Trump credit for putting him out there, because Trump's obviously, he's Trump. He says stupid shit all the time. But Vance is out there connecting the populist message, and he's staying on message with the we're here to help working people, as you're going to see. But this is the other side of this debate from the New York Post here. This is, I don't know how legitimate this is. I'm sure everybody's going to try to prove their point, but I do want to be somewhat fair and show this is what this lady says. She's apparently an Aurora resident who...
A resident of Aurora, Colorado is speaking out about the escalating gang violence, accusing local officials and media of downplaying the presence of Venezuela gangs in her community. Cindy Romero, who left her apartment earlier this year due to safety concerns, described the situation as increasingly dangerous. I feel like it's a slap in the face, Romero told Fox News Digital. How many gangs are acceptable in Aurora? How many people need to be displaced? Her comments come as GOP vice presidential candidate Senator J.D. Vance and ABC's Martha Radas clashed over former President Donald Trump's claims that Venezuela gangs, particularly the transnational Tren de Aragua, have taken over apartment complexes in Aurora. Radas argued that the incident...
I love that they show that picture of them in orange suits, so it's extra scary. The Venezuelans are coming. The Venezuelans are coming. They're coming to take over your apartment complexes, America. be scared of Venezuelan gangs. Don't worry about any of the local crime or crime was already here. Hyper focus on one incident about Venezuelan gangs. And whenever I see this kind of narrative unfolding where it's kind of like a bipartisan thing, they're basically just piling on each other to make it a bigger thing. The propaganda bell goes off, and so I want to just show you real quick. Why they hate Venezuela. And my theory here, to get real with you, is this is a propaganda campaign to grease the gears for military action with Venezuela. Because once you start putting it in the heads of people that, Venezuelan gangs are taking over American cities, once troops show up in Venezuela, jackbooted troops show up there, Americans will support it. Well, we got to do something, their gangs are coming to our neighborhoods and taking us over. So to me, that's the real, the real motivation behind this whole Venezuelan gangs are scary narrative. And just to kind of back that up with some receipts and throw some additional logs on that motivational fire for you, take a look at this. This is a recent post from my boy Combate. And he has Venezuela President Maduro quoted as saying, Netanyahu is a monster created by the European Union and the US empire. And that is why Venezuela is a problem. The other problem is they refuse to ship oil to the Middle East to help fuel the fire of flat out genocide that's going on right now. So here's another tweet from Combate on why they hate Venezuela. Besieged, beleaguered, sanctioned, Venezuela sends 14 tons of food and medicine to the Lebanese people.
Solidaridad para atender. El gobierno bolivariano envía esta ayuda humanitaria en solidaridad para atender la emergencia generada por los múltiples bombardeos y ataques del sionismo israelí en complicidad con Estados Unidos.
Enviando una ayuda humanitaria que consta fundamentalmente de medicamentos, comida y otros enseres para tratar de aliviar un poco los sufrimientos del pueblo que está siendo masacrado. Para el gobierno venezolano, para el presidente Nicolás Maduro y para todo el pueblo, el gobierno, hoy es un día en el que estamos demostrando una vez más nuestra solidaridad. Estamos condenando el genocidio continuado del Estado sionista de Israel, y como nosotros no solamente lo decimos, sino que actuamos, hoy estamos entregando una ayuda de casi 14 toneladas de medicamentos, comida, que va directamente al pueblo sirio y al pueblo libanés.
To the Syrian people. So that, to me, is the motivation behind this whole Venezuelan gangs propaganda, and why the wheels are just like with the Russia shit. Russia took our election in 2020 or 2016, when Trump won. Russia stole our election, just like that. That greased the wheels. And Taibbi just went through and showed you how they manufactured these stories to grease the American mind for the Ukraine thing. And now I see the same patterns here with this Venezuela shit. Sure, if some Venezuelan gangs took over an apartment complex, they should be arrested and put in jail. Just think about this in context too, right? Like, the United States has the most militarized police force in the world. Like, I guarantee you in Colorado, they have Bearcats and drones and all kinds of weapons. And we're supposed to believe that a Venezuelan gang took over, an apartment complex, and they just couldn't do anything about it. No, they rolled their Bearcat down there, arrested all of them, or blew them up, whatever they had to do. But this plays well again for that propaganda. Oh, Venezuelan gangs, Venezuelan gangs, Venezuelan gangs, Venezuelan gangs. American boots need to go on the ground in Venezuela. Well, you saw what was happening. They were taking over our city, so we have to support that. This is the cycle. But just to give JD Vance a little bit of credit before we tie this one off, here's a video I thought was just fantastic of him, because they keep trying to corner him on election interference. They keep trying to like get him to say that the 2020 election was stolen so they can kind of January 6th him and make him into like an insurrectionist, or whatever they need to do. And I loved his response here. This is absolutely fantastic. So check this out.
For another day. I wanted to ask you about what you had said earlier in Pennsylvania about the 2020 election results. You've been asked that on the debate stage with Walls, and then again in the New York Times interview 5 times, and by other reporters.
The crowd starts booing.
Yes, look, ma'am, look, my answer on this, and I answered this question a million times when I ran for the Senate, the 2022 Republican primary. I've answered this question in the 2022 general election. I've answered this question 10 times recently. I think that big tech rigged the election in 2020. That's my view. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. But what?
You answer it now.
I'm sorry?
Why did you answer the question now? Why did you say no when you didn't say it before?
I've given that exact question for years. And this is such a preposterous thing that the American media does. I have given this answer to this question for literally years, and the American media wants to focus on what happened 4 years ago than the fact that North Carolinians can't afford groceries. I think that's a disgrace. Do your job and focus on the problems the American people care about, rather than bullshit from 4 years ago.
That is absolutely beautiful. I love it. So I got to give Vance credit for that. That is what people want to see. And it's smart of Trump to have him out on the trail, speaking at these events and taking these questions, because he's obviously a very intelligent guy, but he has the right populist tone as well. And, even though he incited an insurrection.
That President Trump incited an erection.
His various cases of, he's got charges of inciting an erection.
Donald John Trump incited the erection.
They didn't like Donald Trump. They said he participated in an erection.
I always call it massive. Sometimes they say huge, really large.
All right, moving on. This is a fun one. Most of the shows I watch have already covered this to some degree, but actually, never mind. We're gonna save this for later. I was gonna talk about Gaffighan at the Al Smith dinner, because he has some really good stuff in there. But I'm gonna keep you bored with some basic stuff first, because the theme here is vindication of the vilified, and I wanted to revisit some of these Trump lawfare cases with you real quick. This podcaster Trish Regan actually did. Sometimes I get a little lazy. I go to put the clips together, and I'm like, I don't want to put all these clips together by myself. I don't want to go collect all this data on my own right now. So rather than do that, what I like to do is find someone who's already done it for me and just show their video. So this is Trish Regan. doing kind of a breakdown on where the Trump lawfare cases are at. And this is the Letitia James one specific.
Looking increasingly like, she wants to run for the next mayor position of New York City. Letitia James, who we had to sit through saying stuff like this.
That's a great point, because I forgot that Eric Adams is out. So she's been a good partisan and helped the cause. She might be up next in line.
He's called me venomous. We will fight back to your attempt to bring Trumpism to New York City. He's called me disgraceful. Of the fact that they stole the Supreme Court seat. An illegitimate president and an illegitimate member of the United States Supreme Court. He's called.
See, what I think is interesting about Trump when I think about, my trajectory over the past several years is that, listen to her. Trump actually fights back. They're not used, the status quo is not used to that. And also, can you imagine if this was Bernie Sanders trying to fight these people? Trump has years and years of experience in court, and the resources to actually battle these people who are trying to keep trying desperately, clawing and scratching to keep the status quo in place, despite Americans rejecting it.
Called me radical.
Listen, yes. We know he's crazy. Yes. We know he doesn't have a sound mind. Yes. We know he's out of control. Yes. We know he's losing it. Yes. We know his days are numbered, and we will come together.
He's called me a racist.
We've got to stand up to an administration which is too male, too pale, and too stale.
I
want to talk to you.
So you remember her. Okay. So she's another one that's about to have egg on her face, and she's trying to, run for the exit as fast as she can. As fast as she can, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, she's trying to run right into Eric Adams' spot there in the city of New York. Letitia James is trying to become the mayor of New York. Why? Because, she needs a pit stop here in her big political career, because it's over there in the AG's office. Any day now, that case is going to be reversed. You've heard the judges. I've played you. Actually, I think last Thursday, we did a whole thing on it because I went through all of the testimony and I showed you every single clip of these judges that are questioning why on earth she's going after him in a private case and trying to use a law that was meant for the public in a private case.
It was using.
I'm sorry, but what's being described sounds an awful lot like a potential commercial dispute between private actors.
Well, to go back to the first question about whether there's other examples of this, there are other examples of this. In the first American case, the Attorney General brought a 6312 case where the transaction at issue was between a very big bank, Wells Fargo, and a professional appraisal firm.
But it wasn't the concern there that the public would ultimately be negatively impacted and affected by what those corporate actors were doing.
And that concern is here as well, because when you have hidden risks getting injected into the market, that hurts the market and honest participants in the market. And the legislature also decided, contrary to what defendants think, that making sure that business in New York stays honest is the way to attract and keep business
to that
in New
point.
York.
Okay, all right. So you know what? Like the judges were all.
We covered this a while back because Jon Stewart tried to make a big deal out of this real estate thing, and we found out that Jon Stewart actually falsely inflated the price of his own condo or his own apartment in New York, because that's what you do when you're trying to sell something. You overprice it and then you negotiate down. Or people buy it, at the value you sell it at if you're lucky. But that's how it works. And that's what they're trying to get this guy on. It's ridiculous.
Except for that one lady at the end. They were all like, you're high. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, this is not Lehman Brothers, right? This is an individual transaction with two sophisticated players. Nobody was harmed. There's no one saying, hey, you know what? I got hurt in this transaction. In fact, everybody's happy. So why is Letitia James inserting herself in the middle, except that, well, we know why, right? She wanted to bankrupt him.
She has political aspirations. And I'm going to show you this right now because it ties to our earlier piece with Taibbi. So check this out. This is very interesting. This is Letitia James back in 2 months ago talking about misinformation. Imagine that.
And the New York Attorney General is warning about AI and misinformation ahead of the presidential election. Letitia James is urging major tech companies to take meaningful steps to protect voters, saying AI is making it easier for bad actors to create deceptive content. I want to bring in ABC News senior reporter Emmanuel Saliba for more on this. Emmanuel, how is AI being used to deceive people in the political arena? And what is it James wants these tech companies to do about it?
Well, one of the big issues is that there is no uniform way these tech companies and AI companies are approaching the problem of misinformation and disinformation. She's asking for them to provide clear indication of how they're dealing with these issues ahead of the elections. She's asking for an in-person meeting to go over all of these different issues, which is...
So she can sit with these people and go, look, buddy, we know that you want Kamala to win. So how are you going to help?
Labeling, how do they stop misinformation? What is, and some of their policy is public, but she requested a formal in-person meeting.
So what should we be looking out for? Just as regular people scrolling the internet, how do we detect what is authentic and what is sort of fake created by AI? Are there red flags or kind of little...
Dewey, we wouldn't want to use our own brains. Please tell us what we're supposed to do. Oh, wise and you know, kind overlords.
Warning signs.
I mean, it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell what's been generated using AI and what's human made.
No, it's not.
Seeing is no longer believing when it comes.
Not if you have common sense. It's not. And by the way, all the platforms are already doing something. Facebook or Instagram will just take it down, but Elon will put a community note on it that says, hey, this is AI generated. So we're safe. No further action is necessary.
Online content, and I have to keep saying it because the technology is progressing.
Because I'm a paid hack for the fucking industry that sells the technology to do this, and the gatekeepers who shape elections
day by day. It's important for all of us to understand just how good this technology is getting and just be skeptical. Be skeptical of what you see online. Try to find the original sources.
Smartest thing she said so far.
Go to trusted sources, government
news. That's not smart.
News. Try to find other images of the same scene, like we saw with the...
No, listen to what the government tells you about what they're doing. They wouldn't lie. They've never done it in the past.
The Harris campaign with the Harris photo that has been going viral over the weekend. Try to find other sources. Does this look like it was taken by other people on the ground, or is it just one photo, one video? Is it really the person's voice?
So anyway, there's Letitia James shilling for misinformation. And just to kind of tie this one off in a nice little bow for you, here's Letitia James on MSNBC basically saying out loud that she's trying to help the Democrats.
They're running very scared. That's what I think. They're running very scared, and they have nothing else other than racism and sexism. And so when you have nothing else...
You're a racist! That was like such a Freudian line. They have nothing else except racism and sexism. That is literally the Democrats in 2024. They have no economy. They've blown up the world. They've ruined everything they've touched. They're trying to silence dissent. All they have is you're a racist, and Obama just came out the other day and called fucking black men sexist because they don't want to vote for Kamala. So thank you for vocalizing, Letitia, albeit projection. Thank you for vocalizing the actual state of the Democratic Party.
Unfortunately, you just appeal to the racists among us, the white nationalists among us. That's all. The reality is that Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is qualified. And oftentimes she's, underestimated, but she's an overachiever. And that's why I have wholeheartedly endorsed her.
So there you go. There's the woman who's trying to prosecute Trump, basically saying on television she's endorsing Kamala Harris. That is Oh, that's the world. Can you imagine if the reverse was true? If there was a court case open against Chuck Schumer and one of the Republicans was a prosecutor in that case? Could you imagine that? Like, and then that Republican was going on TV like, yeah, I'm totally for Trump, and we're going to get, if the roles were reversed here, people would be losing their minds. But because it's Trump, it's okay, because he's the most evil threat to democracy the world has ever seen. So we already know the Stormy Daniels case is bullshit. I mean, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, and any politician has that kind of dirt in their closet, and Trump wasn't even a politician. So the Stormy Daniels case on its face is a joke. But here's the other big one, the Jack Smith one. And I do want to show their side of it, because if you watch the Democrat news, everything is like, oh, Jack Smith's going to get Trump, like they've been saying for 20 years. So Fox is a little bit more of a reliable source for news on this case. And Smith apparently did some kind of document dump today that's supposed to be the most damning evidence ever for Trump. But it's, of course, complete, just PR crap, and half of it's redacted, so you can't even see most of it. It's just like, look at all these things that you can't see. Anyway, Trump campaign slams witch hunt after Jack Smith court docs released less than 3 weeks before election. Now, the reason I brought these up is because this right here is election interference. This is the kind of shit that they did last year, or the last cycle, with the Biden laptop and stuff. It's Russian disinformation or whatever. Majority of documents remain under seal, while many of the unsealed materials have previously been released in some form. So it's supposed to be this big scoop. But it's actually just stuff that they've already released before, so they can run a press cycle about how Trump is a terrible person with an indictment open against him. This is why they did it. I don't even think that these people believe, and you can see with the Letitia James thing, I don't even think these people believed that these cases were valid, because the Letitia James one is clearly not. The Stormy Daniels one is clearly not. I believe that's going to be appealed and thrown out if it hasn't been already. But I believe they did this for this reason right here, so they could run news stories about Trump indictments all through election season. And I don't think that it's working the way that they had hoped, because black men and people who have experienced lawfare look at this and go, oh shit, I can relate to that. Shit, they're weaponizing the justice system against him. Wow, I felt that before. I mean, I'm a white guy and I felt that before. So let's just read this real quick. The judge in former President Trump's federal election interference case on Friday made public more documents from special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into former president just weeks before the 2024 election. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered Thursday night that additional documents be made public. The hundreds of pages of documents are Smith's appendix of exhibits in the fight over whether Trump has a level of presidential immunity that negates the charges against him. Radical Democrats are hell-bent on interfering in the presidential election on behalf of Lion Kamala Harris, Trump campaign spokesman Stephen Chung told Fox News Digital. With just over 2 weeks until Election Day, President Trump is dominating this race, and crazed liberals throughout the deep state are freaking out. So far, seems pretty legit. Chung added, as mandated by the Supreme Court's historic decision on presidential immunity and other viral jurisprudence, this entire case is a sham and a partisan, unconstitutional witch hunt that should be dismissed entirely, as should all of the remaining Democrat hoaxes. So there you have it, the Jack Smith case. And America is looking at that one.
But ain't that America? You and me. Ain't that America?
I'm so glad that I crystallized that photo into such a perfect video drop like that. I'm very proud of that one. So, we're going to do one more serious story before we get to the funner stuff. And this one is another vindication of the vilified kind of thing that I wanted to just revisit for the sake of remembering, because the news cycles in this country move so fast that most of the time I feel like people don't even remember stuff that happened a year ago or 6 months ago even. So I went back and found so I originally, when I was setting this up, this is about a woman who resigned from the State Department over the war in Gaza, and it was covered on Democracy Now! A few months ago. But when I went looking for this clip, I found a bunch more, and I only pulled the 3 biggest ones. But there's literally, just Google State Department resignation Gaza, and you'll find all kinds of shit. But this was the first one, and this was the first woman who is a Jewish woman, and her name is Lily Greenberg Call. And let me just load this up for you. Let's watch it. Democracy Now! I have to say too, I definitely fell away from them a little bit when they kind of bought the whole Russiagate thing, but they are one of the better sources. I definitely think they do a much better job, especially on the Israel thing, than any of the mainstream news outlets do. So there is that.
The country and around the world.
On May 15th, Lily Greenberg Call, a special assistant to the chief of staff at the Department of the Interior and a political appointee of President Biden, resigned from her position in protest of the administration's policies in Gaza. In doing so, she became the first known Jewish appointee to resign from the Biden administration over Gaza. In a 4-page letter of resignation she released publicly, Greenberg Call wrote, quote, "I can no longer in good conscience continue to represent this administration amidst President Biden's disastrous continued support for Israel's genocide in Gaza," unquote. Lily Greenberg Call chose May 15th as the date of her resignation because it marked the anniversary of the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, when up to 900,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes and displaced in 1948 during the founding of Israel. In her resignation letter, she wrote, quote, "Nakba and Shoah, the Hebrew word for Holocaust, mean the same thing, catastrophe. I reject the premise that one people's salvation must come at another's destruction. I'm committed to creating a world where this does not happen, and this cannot be done from within the Biden administration," she wrote. Lily Greenberg Call joins us today in our New York studio. Lily, welcome to Democracy Now! Thanks so much for joining us. If you can talk about the significance of the date you chose and why you have decided to resign.
Thanks for having me, Amy. So as I said in my resignation letter, Nakba and Shoah mean the same thing. I was raised with a fairy tale about the Nakba. The Nakba was something that I was not really told about, and if anything, it was minimized and trivialized. Was raised with this idea that Israel was a land without a people for a people without a land. And so if there's no Palestinian society, if there's nothing to be destroyed, then there's nothing to mourn. So I felt as a Jewish person that it was particularly important for me to acknowledge the significance of the Nakba, and the Nakba that has never really ended, that continues to this day.
I just want to say too, Jewish people have been the most vocal opponents of this, and credit where credit is due. My fellow Jewish friends who have spoken out about this, because your voices are the most important. I mean, this woman saying this is just, it's massive. He works for the State Department.
And, as I mentioned, there's something devastating about the parallels between, the same word, Nakba and Shoah, and the idea that what many Jews see as our salvation in the formation of the State of Israel came at the expense of Palestinian freedom. And so I want us to reject that premise, the idea that Jewish safety and Palestinian freedom are at odds with each other, and understand that any system that requires that, requires the oppression of one people for another, is inherently unsafe.
I don't know if unsafe is the word I would use, but very well said. So let's go to resignation number 2 here. And this is a woman named Hala Rarit. Forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly, but another State Department employee who resigned over the Gaza war. Here we go.
Department in the region. She joins us now in her first TV interview with this officer to do so. State Department diplomat to publicly resign over the war on Gaza. Halarat is an 18-year career diplomat who recently resigned from the State Department. She's the third State Department employee, but the first Foreign Service officer to do so. Halarat served as the Arabic language spokesperson for the State Department in the region. She joins us now in her first TV interview since her resignation. Halarat, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much, Amy. It's an honor to be with you.
Can you start off by talking about why you have publicly resigned?
Absolutely. Honestly, I wasn't intending to publicly resign. I was intending to resign. My profile at the Dubai Media Hub, my last assignment, was quite high profile. My role was to speak to Arab media about American policy. So it inevitably made the news when I did resign. It first made the news, I believe, here in the region and the United States. But the reason why I resigned is really because I could no longer be a part of the State Department and promote this policy. It's an inhumane policy. It's a failed policy that is helping neither Palestinians, neither Israelis. And I want to stress that point, that it's not strictly the horrific mass killings that we have all been watching over the course of over 200 days, the targeting of journalists, of healthcare workers, over 14,000 children massacred. But it's also not keeping Israelis any safer. The hostages.
I just want to pause there for a second, because that honestly is the argument that I have been making continually since the Iraq War. Us dissidents, we don't hate America. We're not working for Putin. We're not working for Hamas or any of the dumb, lunk-headed bullshit that people say. We're critics of our country because we see that this causes problems for us. And what she's pointing out here is that this whole thing that's happening, it's not good for Israel. It's making Israel unsafe, you know? So if you care about Israel, you should be against this. And I also feel like the Ukraine thing was kind of a test run for how much Americans are willing to accept, because none of us voted for this. Even the dumb fucks who got duped into voting for Biden didn't vote for war in Gaza and war in Ukraine. You know, none of them voted for that, even though they were dumb enough to be duped into voting for Biden, which I'm so happy I did not vote for Biden in the last election cycle. But let me let her finish up, because this third State Department resignation is the best one of all three.
Are still in Gaza. Israelis know that there's going to be a vicious cycle of violence after so many have been killed in Gaza. This does not help anyone. And the militaristic policy is not the solution. As a diplomat,
and as Americans, we are so spoiled because we live in a safe environment while our country is creating chaos everywhere else. We just haven't been hit yet, thankfully, you know, because it's not like we're in a good place militarily. Jesus.
As someone that believes in diplomacy, in the power of diplomacy, I did everything I could from within to try to explain this on a daily basis, through reports, through cables. Nothing was working until finally I made the decision that I could no longer be part of the system.
What do you feel President Biden and your boss at the State Department, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, could do right now?
Wait a minute. Did she just say Secretary of State Tony Blinken? Keep on bombing lots of people. It was an opportunity. I took it.
Be most effective.
They need to abide by national, domestic law, and international law. We have systems in place within the State Department to ensure situations like this don't happen. We are not authorized to send military equipment, weapons to countries that commit human rights abuses. ICJ has determined plausible genocide, yet we are still sending billions upon billions of not just defensive weaponry, but offensive weaponry. It is tantamount to a violation of domestic law.
But vote for Kamala Harris if you want that to stop. The person who's
I want to talk to you.
Many diplomats know it. Many diplomats are scared to say it. It's a violation of international law, what we've been seeing happening in Gaza. And we cannot make exceptions for our allies. It does not help our allies to make exceptions. Because again, all that this is doing is creating a vicious cycle of violence. And it has clearly failed. Its objectives, it has failed. The hostages are still not back with their families where they belong. The situation in
the idea that Netanyahu ever cared about the hostages is hilarious on its face.
Gaza remains intensely unstable. People continue to suffer on a daily basis. It's time for President Biden and Secretary Blinken to realize that this militaristic approach has been a failure and they need to stop. They need to abide by US law, and that doing so will create a lot of leverage. If we are able to condition military aid, we will be able to pressure Israel. We will also be able to work with our Arab allies to pressure Hamas to have real substantive change on the ground. That's what's necessary at this time, not more arms.
And this is what people have been saying from day one. From day one. So let's get into this last State Department resignation here. And this is a woman named Stacey Gilbert. And I think of all the people who resigned, she kind of has the most clear and concise statements and kind of rationale behind what she thinks should happen. So check this out.
By viewers like you. Please support our work. I'm Amy Goodman, Administration Support for the War, Refugees and Migration, which is the State Department's chief humanitarian office and features heavily in internal policy discussions over Gaza. This week, she sent an email to staff explaining her disagreements with a recently published State Department report that she worked on, but which concluded that Israel was not obstructing U.S. humanitarian assistance to Gaza. That report was used by the Biden administration to justify continuing to send more than $1 billion of weapons to Israel. Stacey Gilbert resigned after working at the State Department for over 20 years. Joining us now from Baltimore, Maryland.
That's count them, 2 career State Department officials, 20 years resigning over this. And again, who voted for this? When you voted for Biden, did you vote for war in Gaza and Ukraine and record inflation and complete garbage? What's up, Truth? Good to see you, my brother. So listen to this, because this woman here lays out how goddamn corrupt the current administration is in reality.
Stacey, welcome. Sorry. Explain your final decision to resign.
Thanks for having me. I have, about myself, I've worked for the State Department for a while, and it's not just working in the State Department. I've worked in humanitarian issues, refugee crises, basically most every refugee and humanitarian crisis involving conflict in that time. So Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. My role in all of this specifically was supporting our team that oversees assistance to Gaza and the Middle East, but specifically working on this report. We were directed in early February by the White House to come up with a report that assesses different countries based on 2 things primarily. One is their adherence to, as Alex mentioned, international humanitarian law, which is the law that says there are wars, but there are rules in war. There's rules about the kind of weapons you can use, about making the distinction between civilians and combatants. And basically, it's a body of laws that says, even in war, there are ways that you have to mitigate the consequences.
So just to stop here for a second, if you notice, the common thread between all these resignees is a refusal of the current administration to obey international law. And the whole argument for what they're doing to the Palestinians is we're better than that. We're better than those terrorists. Are we? No, we're not. Not at all. It's insane. But listen to the theme that this woman goes through is exactly what's wrong with America as a whole. Because what she describes here is a person on the ground level who's doing their job correctly, and a person on the top level superseding that and saying, no, we'll fix this. You're off this one now. We got it. Because that's what happens in the news media. You have a reporter that does a really great job that exposes the administration, and then you have an editor that takes that and rearranges the wording and makes it basically a non-story. And that's exactly what happens here. Listen to this woman.
For civilians and soldiers. And we adhere to that. Israel adheres to it. It is international law. So this report was looking at adherence to that body of law, as well as whether countries allow humanitarian assistance. There were several countries we were assessing, but the one, unsurprisingly, that generated the most debate was Israel. I was working on this report with many others. There were a handful of us who were very, very engaged in every sentence of that. But at some point, we were removed from that report, and it was moved up to a higher level to be written and edited and cleared. So even though I had worked on this pretty heavily since this directive from the White House came out in early February, I did not know what was in the report until it came out. That said, I was actually hopeful.
She was hopeful
that it would be a honest report, because earlier that week, the White House had made an announcement that it was going to pause the 2,000-pound bombs that are
I want to talk to you.
Have really caused disproportionate destruction in Gaza. So they had announced a pause on that. And I was actually pretty hopeful that maybe this report was going to be honest. So when the report came out on May 10th, late in the day, I read it. And I had to reread it because I couldn't believe what it said. It said very clearly, it actually, so on those 2 points, I was surprised on the point about Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law. For the first time I'm aware of, we admitted in very, very weak terms, but we admitted that Israel is likely using US weapons in violation of international humanitarian law. I was surprised. That was a step forward in admitting that. I was shocked, however, that it also went on to say that Israel, it is our assessment that Israel is not blocking humanitarian assistance. That is not the view of subject matter experts at the State Department, at USAID, nor among the humanitarian community, and that was known. That was absolutely known to the administration.
Anti-Semite right here. You know, the ADL would definitely call this woman an anti-Semite. Listen to her.
ADL is played out. Nobody knows who the ADL are. Stop giving them attention. Nobody cares about the ADL.
Administration for a very long time, not just within the government, but having received reports and letters from organizations on the ground in Gaza, organizations the US government funds, credible organizations saying Israel is blocking humanitarian assistance. And that's not to say that Israel is the only problem in this. There are certainly, it's a conflict, it's difficult. But these are professional organizations with expertise, local knowledge. They know how to work in conflicts. They know how to do the negotiations, to get the assistance to where it needs to be. They know how to do it. The issue is they are not being allowed to. And it's a range of issues. It's not just blocking trucks from going in, because we see over the course of this conflict, sometimes trucks go in, sometimes they're delayed, sometimes assistance goes in, but then it's ratcheted back. But we're seeing consistently through this a pattern of obstruction that the aid that prevents these organizations from doing their work and delivering this assistance to the people who need it. It's a
I didn't put this clip in, but maybe I'll have to plug it in post. But do you remember when they killed the World Central Kitchen workers? They literally put a bomb right through the roof of their truck that said World Central Kitchen on top of it because Hamas or something, you know? So I think the title of this segment can just be 3 anti-Semites resign from the State Department, maybe, you know? That could be a working title for this particular segment, because these are 3 tenured State Department officials who have resigned over the corruption in the current situation in Gaza. And villains, all of them.
I want to talk to you. Okay, I come first.
They want to know now.
Over there after 2.
So we're going to move on to our next segment here, which is probably my favorite one of the day. And if you watch, you know, the indie news streamers, guys like Jimmy Dore and Dudisons, you've probably seen some of this. But I happened to catch the whole clip of Jim Gaffighan speaking at the Al Smith dinner the other night. And the thing that's the craziest about this, and you know, other people may have covered this, I may be a little late to the party on this, but this blew my mind. The people that are in this room together. Let's start with that. Anyway, let me pull this clip up for you so you can enjoy this, because this is, I mean, also props to Jim Gaffighan for having a giant set of balls, you know, for going off on these people the way that he has, because wow.
Hey, are there any balls down there? The biggest player you ever seen, Diggleberry.
That's my new balls sound drop for you there. So first of all, let's just look at this room right here, okay? Before we really get into this, let me make sure this is blown up for you here. So here's who is sitting in this room. As Jim comes to the stage.
Thank you.
Okay, so pause right here. So this is just the people that I know too. To Jim's right, or his left, but my right, is Chuck Schumer, right next to the Cardinal. And next to the Cardinal on the other side is Donald Trump and Melania Trump. And then down in the front row here is Michael Bloomberg, directly in front of the podium. And then over here on the left, I believe, is Kathy Hochul. And then other people that are in attendance, Eric, what's the guy, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York. Letitia James, I believe, is back on the back row on the far left side. So you have Trump and Melania Trump, and then literally like every Democrat in the room that has spent the last, 10 years, almost 10 years, accusing him of being a Russian asset. And then you have Jim Gaffighan. And what I love about Gaffighan here is, even more than the jokes he does about the Democrats and stuff, is the way he goes class war on these people. And you just have to listen to the stuff he says. It's so good. So anyway.
Thank you. Good evening, rich people.
Good evening, rich people.
I got to be honest. I feel like I'm at a casting call for Daddy Warbucks. And I'm not going to get the job. Welcome, Your Eminence, President Trump, First Lady, random millionaires who are not yet billionaires. Welcome to the 79th annual Al Smith Memorial Dinner. As you can, please give it up. Yes. As you can see how we're dressed, the theme again is let them eat cake. Now, I understand some of you may recognize me as the guy who plays Tim Walz on SNL, but I want you to know that I'm going to be fair and balanced tonight, and I'm going to make jokes about both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
I want to talk to you.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the elephant in the room. You know, you're all thinking about it. Let me just cut to the point and point out who's not here. And of course, I'm talking about the middle class.
So
That
full context on that
filthy
joke.
group of
That was good. He's like, let's talk about who's not here because Kamala Harris is not there. So he's like, of course I'm talking about the middle class.
people. Right, Chuck? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That's Chuck Schumer.
Can we have a round of applause for Chuck Schumer?
Okay.
Right?
And again, this is my favorite piece of this that didn't make it onto Twitter maybe or I haven't seen yet is him going at Schumer so hard. This is so good.
See, he does like being near microphones.
Schumer recently said something on a hot mic.
But seriously, this is a special night, people. This is the one night when Republicans and Democrats who used to be Republican and Republicans who used to be Democrats and independents and whatever Michael Bloomberg is now, we can. There he is. He's up there.
He's right in front of the podium.
I love how the front row doesn't even look at me. See what I mean? Like, do those seats cost more? How much does it cost to not have?
I should have done my research on who these other guys are. I did find an article about who was at it, but they didn't mention, like, they didn't go through one by one who these people are. They just mentioned like who the political celebrities
Look at
were.
Gaffighan. That's my Bloomberg impression. I don't know about you. I think this is exciting. This is very exciting, right? We are 19 days until the election and likely a civil war. And, you know, I'm nervous. You know what I mean? It's like, this is my first civil war, guys. I don't own a musket. Have we decided who's wearing blue and who's wearing gray? Because I look better in blue because of my eyes, you know?
I watched the movie Good, Bad, and the Ugly over the weekend, and the whole Civil War backdrop of that movie just got me thinking about how the red versus blue dichotomy that we live in is kind of like the continuation of the Civil War. Basically, the reds are the Confederates and the blues are the Union, and how we've kind of been trapped in that mindset ever since of, you know, we're fighting each other as a country.
But of course, let's acknowledge our host for the evening, the Archbishop of New York,
I'm going to skip past
Timothy Michael Cardinal Dolan. Full disclosure, Cardinal Dolan is also a friend of mine, and I would never put him on the spot, but Cardinal Dolan, I'm curious. The Pope did say that this election is a choice between the lesser of two evils. And so, two-part question. One, do you agree? And two, who's more evil? All right, I'll come back to you.
Right next to Trump, too.
This, of course, is a Catholic event honoring Governor Al Smith, who in 1928 was the first Catholic to run on a major party. To put that in perspective, in 1928, Chuck Schumer was a first-term senator.
Yeah,
Chuck.
He's going hard on Chuck Schumer.
Of course, Joe Biden was our second Catholic president, right? After JFK. President Biden couldn't be here tonight. The DNC made sure of that.
They don't want him talking in election season.
Oh, that's... I guess I'm the only one that reads history. But this is a Catholic event. I'm Catholic. Any Catholics here? Yeah. They're yelling because it's hard to clap when you're holding a cocktail. You know, if I could, I'd like to talk about my faith for a moment. Personally, today is a special day. Today, my wife Jeannie and I are celebrating our 21st. Americans identify as Catholic. Catholics will be a key demographic in every battleground state. I'm sorry. Why is Vice President Harris not here?
I want to talk to you.
I mean, consider this. This is a room full of Catholics and Jews in New York City. This is a layup for the Democratic nominee. I mean, in her defense, I mean, she did find time to appear on The View, Howard Stern, Colbert, and the longtime staple of campaigning, the Call Her Daddy podcast. You know what I think it is? I think she doesn't like me. Chuck, do I have bad breath? You know, but I love New York City. I believe that this city is the greatest city on earth. I do believe that. You know, and don't get me wrong. I love driving an hour and a half to Randall's Island to watch my son play soccer for 20 minutes. Of course, New York City is where Donald Trump was raised, right? And he turned out great.
Jump around a little bit.
And after we pressure Mike Bloomberg to give more money, we will, who presently has the #1 book in America.
Oh, Melania Trump.
Let's go positive here. Can we have a round of applause for First Lady Melania Trump? Who presently has the #1 book in America. Yeah. And you know, by the way, Jesus taught us to forgive 7 times, not 7 times, but 70 times anyone. Some of the most powerful people in New York City, and Brian Kilmeade.
Hold on, let me back
I
up.
can play Family Feud. And the survey says, whatever you want. This dais, actually, let's be honest, this entire room is filled with some of the most powerful people in New York City, and Brian Kilmeade. Remember, Brian, I told you? Brian and I started doing stand-up together, so. And if you don't have any allegations yet, okay?
Oh, this is good.
Humor about this, because this room is undeniably impressive. It really is. The prestige, the wealth, the allegations. I mean, wow. And don't feel bad if you don't have any allegations yet, okay? Which reminds me, Letitia James is here.
Ooh, this is good.
She had a great year. She's just back there watching all of you. She's watching. By the way, can I point out that this is a very nimble thing that I'm trying to do, right? Because if I am too critical of Vice President Harris, I will, you know, I will lose friendships and, you know, and mess up my career. And if I am too critical of President Trump, I will lose friendships and improve my career. Do you know what I mean?
Truth. Comedy's great because it kind of gives people permission to tell the truth like that. You know, it's rare that you see that kind of raw truth in any other scenario.
I've been amazed. By the way, RFK Jr. is here. Welcome, sir.
RFK Jr. is there off camera.
RFK Jr. He, of course, is going to make America, he's part of the MAGA, Make America Healthy Again, right? I don't know if he's seen what Donald Trump eats, but Donald Trump eats like, well, me and the Cardinal, okay? And anyway, now the prompter guy, I went off book a little bit here. So anyway, I'd like to also welcome Mayor Adams, brought to you by Turkish Airlines. I was told to say that. It's a sponsorship deal, people. You know, we have a lot of formers on the dais tonight, all right? Former mayors, former governors, former respected journalists.
This is the best.
Is there any other kind, really?
Former
Now, I understand some people may have an issue with a journalist appearing on a dais, hobnobbing with the rich and powerful. It would appear like a clear conflict of interest, and that's because it absolutely is. Look, the days of Walter Cronkite are gone. Most journalists have their own TikTok. You know, the President Trump regularly appears on a show called Fox and Friends. That's not a mistake. He's their best friend. Former Mayor Bloomberg is here.
I'm going to stop right there. I thought that was the joke about the journalists and the conflict of interest thing, I think, was the high point. And it kind of calls to mind, you know, when like Stephen Colbert did the press correspondence dinner back in the Bush days and actually spoke truth to power and like roasted them about the weapons and stuff. But a lot of the big hubbub around that was, you know, some of the jokes that he made about, you know, Trump and some of the other stuff. But I thought the uncovered stuff there was the way he cracked on the room, having no middle class people, and the whole thing about the journalists, you know, in the room being a conflict of interest. Because this is what I was trying to explain to one of my relatives the other night. Was trying to convince me that I need to vote for Kamala for abortion rights. Is that these people, again, are actors reading a script. They're not journalists. If they were journalists, they wouldn't be in that room. That's why Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fong and all those guys are Russian propagandists. They're not willing to suck the giant money tube. So let's see this. Do you think Gaffighan got a little red pill after getting roasted for his shit Libby appearance on Joe Rogan? I honestly completely think that is the case. I completely believe that. I think that he lived in that bubble, and when he did Rogan, and Rogan's a good dude, and that's the comedy, like that. Rogan has created the kind of the center of the universe for American comedy now because of his commitment to open dialogue and just like ignoring the people that are overly offended pearl clutchers and all that kind of stuff. So even though Gaffighan may have disagreed with him a little bit in that appearance, I think that you're right. It hit him in a way that he went, oh shit, like I've been living in a insulated bubble in New York, just listening to these robots say the same thing over and over again. And there's actually a huge world outside of that bubble, you know? And I mean, I also think that when you get asked to do a gig like that, the goal is to be as controversial and harsh as you can. So I think he took that opportunity to kind of really lay it into people. And I do think you're completely right about the Rogan red pill thing. So we're gonna end today with this clip of Tim Dillon talking about Biden and Obama at the funeral of one of the Kennedys, which is, again, it's just interesting to see this stuff because I guarantee you RFK Jr. was at this funeral too, and you don't hear this, but apparently, so there's this whole thing where Biden and Obama are talking at the funeral, and some lip readers, I guess, went into it, but Tim Dillon's kind of coverage of it is much better. I like what he does. He kind of does the whole mute it and replace the words with his own thoughts, which is brilliant. So let's watch a little bit of this and we'll talk about it.
We don't know that. Somebody knows that. We don't know that. I don't know where she is. Diddy's in prison. We don't know that. I'm sure he is. But I don't know. We'll take everybody's word for it that everybody's in prison and that he's running the country. I mean, but you do. Without, I mean, I'm not trying to be like a crazy person, But you do just have to go, oh, okay, I guess justice is being done. And then you don't know. Do we know what kind of prison Maxwell's in, what she's doing? What's the day-to-day look like? Not really. But we imagine that she's in a prison and not on some secret CIA island somewhere, you know. So people are trying to figure out what Joe Biden is saying to Barack Obama, because Joe Biden clearly does not want Kamala to win. This is obvious. I like this thing he's doing where he's old, but he's showing he's got a little pep in his step. He's angry. He's being ornery. He's putting on Trump hats. He's smirking. He's showing you that he's still alive. I really like this, and I like his attitude now. He has this very kind of, he's become like an imp, Joe Biden. Like he's an old, and I like in his final form, before he goes to the great beyond, the idea that he's being a cut up, he's being a little bit of a problem. He's throwing on a Trump hat. He's smirking. He's starting kind of fun. He's verbally jousting with people.
Reporters.
At the rallies. He knows what was done to him. He has just enough left to know that he was put out to pasture. And whether you think it's right or not, or whether you think it's a good move or not, he knows what was done to him. And
definitely a good move for the Democrats to some extent. At least I thought that initially. I don't know if I think that now, but
he knows who did it, and he knows why it was done. And he knows that it was done because the system that Joe Biden is a part of lost faith in him to carry out their edicts. The people that stand by.
So this is the reason I wanted to play this, because I think Tim Dillon verbalizes what just happened in the Democratic Party better than anyone I've ever heard. But let him finish here.
Behind the power in America lost faith in Joe Biden's ability to sell their agenda to the country. He knows it is not a genuine concern for his health or the country or his decision-making ability. He understands the role he played, and he understands why they want him out. So you got to understand that. Joe Biden, even though he is old and infirmed and in and out of consciousness and has barely any idea where he is, he knows just enough to know why he was thrown out in favor of Kamala Harris. So here we have it. It's fascinating. Again, it's not.
So I think when he verbalized that too, it kind of gave me the words to describe why I wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. And what I was trying to explain to my cousin is that she's clearly the vessel for the continuation of the current trajectory that we're on. And just for that reason alone, I would not vote for her. It doesn't have to do with whether she's a Democrat or a woman, a person of color. None of that stuff matters to most people. Most people see her as the continuation of the trajectory we're currently on. And then we have another choice. And it's that simple.
Political, really. This isn't about politics. This is why this is a very tough time for intelligent people, because and thankfully there are so few. But it is a hard time for intelligent people because there are things I agree with Republicans on. There are things I agree with Democrats on. Maybe more at this point, Republicans and Democrats. But it's not. I don't completely think the Democrats are wrong about everything. Certainly not the type of Democrats I grew up with that cared about the working class. What is happening in the country right now is not political. It's not about whose ideas are better. It's not about what tax rate is higher or not high. It is a raw power struggle. And whatever side of that you were on, you're not on any side of it because you're a citizen You're sitting in your house. You're going to cast a ballot. You've never run the country. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings out there. I know many of you are surprised by this, maybe. You've never run the country.
And I think to that point, the people who voted for Trump in 2016 know that. And that's why it was such a moment for that. I was like, oh, crap. You know, we kind of like accidentally trolled this guy into office, sort of, because all the cunts in the media were telling us like this was a non-starter. All the dudes that the Fortune 500 people that got behind Hillary, like in the 2016 election, and Biden, you know, they literally banded together and made sure. The 2020 election, man, I don't want to go too far down this road, but just think about what happened during that period. The entire country was locked down. There couldn't be protests. You couldn't go to a polling station and talk to people that were coming in and out of voting booths. It was a little bit of a shaky situation, to put it lightly. And so, again, it's even if Trump is just the vessel of the populist vessel that's like, hey, you know, these people, we just want to make them upset. That's good enough for me.
Your ideas are taken into consideration from time to time. That is the best you can say about nobody voted on immigration. Nobody voted on the Ukraine war. Nobody voted on these things. Did you vote about Syria, going into Syria? Did you vote on that? Did you vote on that? When they set up 19 intelligence agencies, did you vote on any of that? Do you know what any of them are? Do you know who runs them? Do you know what they do? You didn't vote on any of that. What's going on in the country right now is not political in the way that it doesn't mean that things don't have political aspects to them. It doesn't mean that there aren't policies that you agree with more than you disagree with or whatever. I'm trying to get you to think as an adult, which is very difficult, but I try every week. And I want you to zoom out. And I want you to think of the country not as a group of people that are arguing about things and trying to persuade you of them. I want you to think of it as a group of crime families, warring crime families. And you will understand immediately. Everything becomes clear immediately. It's if a switch was flipped and then overnight you completely understand everything. If you read American history,
Tim's breakdown of Obama,
and everybody's out for themselves. So let's take a listen here to the appropriately creepy Halloween meeting between Joe Biden and Barack Obama, and let's try to figure out what they're saying, if anything. It's bad. Yeah, it's terrible. Obama says it's over. It's done. She's done. Biden goes, he's staring. Obama's going, she doesn't have it. She doesn't have it. Biden goes, can we shoot her? You know, if we shot her, like I know they didn't shoot him, but we could shoot her potentially. And Obama goes, I don't think that's going to make a lot of sense. He goes, we've thought about that. I have thought about that. You know, Michelle brought that up the other night. Well, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Biden says. I mean, you know, and he goes, but listen, here's the reality. Then who comes in? So now they're just looking at Clinton to make sure he didn't
see the look on Obama's face when he realized it was Bill Clinton.
He goes, isn't that beautiful? He points to the organ. He goes, the organ's beautiful. But that's really what it is, folks. They're just trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out what happens next if Donald Trump wins, and then he starts looking into who shot him, or he starts looking into what, you know, Russiagate or any of that. I think a lot of people are upset. Let me read a statement, by the way, that I'm legally obligated.
So that's Tim Dillon's take on the Biden-Obama meetup. And I think it's fairly accurate. Maybe not the part about should we pull the trigger, but, you know, the rest of it I think is pretty spot on. And the way that he summarizes the current state of America is absolutely spot on. And like I said, he kind of sums up like the vessel thing. Kamala is literally the vessel. They tried to put Biden over again as the vessel for all these interests that are pulling the strings, but Kamala's not looking like she's gonna be able to.
I want to talk to you.
Okay. So anyway, we're gonna close out today, and on the way out, I just want you to remember this reality from your man David Korn, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe, all that shit. Love you guys. Hit me up on Twitter. Hit me up in the comments. Truth violates community standards. You're the man. And just remember this when you go in the voting booth, people.
Trump colluded with Russia. I wrote a book about it. Trump colluded with Russia. I wrote a book about it. Taibbi is a bad person. Trump colluded with Russia. Trump colluded with Russia. Taibbi is a bad person. I wrote a book about it. Taibbi is bad. Jeff Girth. Trump colluded with Russia. I wrote a book about it. Trump colluded with Russia. I wrote a book about it. Taibbi is a bad person. Trump colluded with Russia. Trump colluded with Russia. Taibbi is a bad person.